Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
And from Memo, Middle East Monitor, Israel to impose West Bank Gaza crossing closures during Jewish holiday. Israel occupation forces announced yesterday that no crossings or checkpoints will operate from today until Wednesday, leaving the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip cut off. The decision comes as Israel prepares to mark the Jewish holiday of Purim tomorrow and Wednesday. The closures are standard practice during the Jewish national holiday of Purim, which the military claims is a preventative measure. Exceptions will be made for humanitarian and other outstanding cases. Still, they will require the approval of the coordinator of government activities in these territories, the occupation force in charge of Palestinian affairs in the occupied territories. According to the Times of Israel, the occupation said the border crossings for Palestinians were to reopen on Thursday, subject to a situational assessment. The Israeli measures include the closure of all major roads, setting up military checkpoints, and the intensification of the army's presence, as well as the closure of all crossings around the Gaza Strip, tightening the siege even further. All such abusive and oppressive actions against Palestinians are said to be needed as a means of securing the celebrations of the settlers. Last year was the first year in 5 years in which a closure was not imposed on the occupied West Bank. These closures further damage and limit the growth of the Palestinian economy. Purim is celebrated every year on the 14th of the Hebrew month of Adar, which generally falls in late winter or early spring. Huwara rampage, more overhaul prompted by way of insubordination threat. Prescient. This is from the Times of Israel. Prescient. That's perhaps the word that best describes the letter the commander of the Israeli Air Force sent to his subordinates on Friday, demanding that they continue to report for duty and making it clear that the military would continue to operate according to well-established moral standards. A day earlier, Major General Tomer Bar had spoken with the Air Force's senior brass, both career and reserve officers, and first realized the extent of the crisis. During that conversation, it was mostly the reservists who spoke out, among them pilots and EIAI, who expressed fear that the government's radical judicial overhaul plans could expose them to arrest in various international airports and prosecution by global forums such as the International Criminal Court. Israel has long argued against such probes, pointing to the strength and independence of its own judiciary, which is responsible for investigating the incidents of wrongdoing by Israeli forces. Critics of the government's legal overhaul warn that efforts to restrict the High Court of Justice's power will rob the country of legitimacy in the international arena. But for the pilots, even more than the legal concerns that they specified in their letter, the crisis centered on Huwara, the Palestinian town where settler vigilantes rampaged last week, torching homes and cars and wounding dozens of residents. One Palestinian was shot dead in unclear circumstances. The Huwara incident crossed a dangerous line. One of the senior fighter pilots who participated in the conversation told the Times of Israel, "We didn't hear unequivocal wall-to-wall condemnation of the lynching of Palestinian civilians by Jewish hoodlums," said the officer, a reservist brigadier general who used to command one of the IAF's largest bases. Instead, he continued, "We heard support for these actions from Knesset members, equivocation from ministers, and mealy-mouthed condemnations from large swaths of the hard right. And then to cap it off, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich came along on Wednesday with his blunt statement calling for Huwara to be wiped out." "We who attack enemy targets at the behest of political leaders have never heard of an order to wipe out a village," added the officer, whose name cannot be published due to the sensitivity of his position. In the past, we never doubted the righteousness of the path and the morality of decisions. Today, there are questions. And today, there are questions marking or question marks regarding the moral fiber of some of the decision makers. That's why we're issuing this warning. Confronted with such statements during his meeting with the senior pilots, Barr, the AIF chief, realized he had to act fast and put out the flames before they spread and gave rise to widespread insubordination. In a letter that he penned to reservist air crews immediately after the meeting, one line stood out as a direct response to the concerns regarding the Huwawa rampage. I will state the obvious. The Zionist occupying forces, including the IAF, conducts itself according to the codified operational practice and the moral standards, values, and spirit of the IDF, and will continue to do so. I will insist on it no matter what, as always, he wrote. In other words, Barr told his pilots, not on my watch. I'm the moral buttress protecting you from any immoral command. What he did not state, but was apparent between the lines, was a commitment to say no to political leaders should the need arise. For the pilots of the 69th Squadron, the IAF strategic unit, which bombed Syria's nuclear reactor in 2007 and would likely lead the charge in any future Israeli attack on Iran, it was too little too late. On Sunday, 37 of the squadron's 40 pilots announced in a letter that they would not show up in the training session on Wednesday in protest of the government's plan to radically curtail the judiciary. The Air Force is unsure how to respond to the letter, which places the military in the middle of a socio-political battleground that it desperately sought to avoid. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has in recent weeks been trying to steer the military establishment between two political landmines. Finance Minister Smotrich and his far-right ally Itamar Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, on Sunday. Gallant joined Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, two former chiefs of staff currently with the opposition National Unity Party, in calling for dialogue and for the IDF to stay out of the fray. That, too, may not be enough, with additional reserve pilots already gearing up to join the protest of their comrades in the 69th Squadron. Though the IAF is hoping that the protests will end this week and the pilots will show up for duty, the military is beginning to understand that their actions only a symptom pointing to a more severe condition. The Air Force is where the crisis first manifested, merely due to the fact that pilots have to show up for weekly practice flights and fitness tests, not because pilots are inherently more politically conscious than other reservists. No one in the military is under the illusion that the reservists in the ground forces will not launch similar protests in similar numbers, though they're due to the extent of their service a few weeks every year. The magnitude will not be apparent until the end of the year. For the time being, there are reports of silent protests, not as organized as the one launched by the pilots. It is instructive that Huwawa rampage is proving to be a watershed for the military, both standing army and the reserves. Chief of Staff Hersi Halevi made it clear that he sees the incident as an ethical bellwether, an operational failure with a moral implication. Halevi staked out that territory in a speech last week to graduating Navy officers. I would say that that's true, but I would also say that, let's put it in the context of Jenin as well and make sure that Huwawa isn't used as a cover to exploit Jenin, that they both should be closely monitored. We also had to prevent what developed in the wake of the initial attack in Huwawa, he said, referring to the terror shooting that killed 2 Israeli brothers. See, that's what I was saying. Just right before I read, I didn't know it was there, but this idea that the 2 Israeli brothers are at the beginning of, all of the conflicts between these people, when in reality you have occupiers being the issue, Zionist apartheid occupiers that need to be removed. Halevi is not a man of many words. Trained as a philosopher, he knows how to keep his message concise. The fact that he chose to address the Huwawa incident in such a manner, disregarding the diplomatic fallout, for instance, Smotrich's comments and the American response to them, is a clear indication that he has no intention of letting it slide. The head of the IDF Central Command, Major General Yehuda Fox, who is in charge of troops of the West Bank, said last week that the vigilante settlers had carried out a pogrom in Huwawa. Later this week, he's set to present Halevi with the results of an IDF investigation into the incident. Fox has already admitted that the military was caught unprepared, so there are likely to be several repercussions along the chain of command.
Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious.
That entire paragraph is a cope. It's a full-on cope. You know, this idea that they weren't prepared, you know, and we've seen in multiple, and just in the past few weeks, and I'm sure it happens quite often, we've seen multiple occasions where the Zionist occupying forces disallow ambulances and other caretakers to be on the scene to help those injured. So this is all a cope. And the head of the IDF Central Command, that we just read that. And it seems that at least as far as the IDF is concerned, the Huawa rampage, beyond being the result of extremist ideology among some in the settler movement, is a symptom of broader, more dangerous moral lapse. I don't think it's from extremist ideology. And remember, that was from the Times of Israel. It's not really a impartial paper. Palestinian authorities scurries to stop new West Bank resistance faction, a report. Support for the PA has plummeted as a result of its collaboration with the Israeli army to persecute and apprehend resistance fighters and critics. Palestinian Authority forces are working to prevent a new Palestinian resistance faction from gaining a foothold in the northern West Bank city of Tulkarm, according to a PA official who spoke with the Jerusalem Post. The Tulkarm Brigade army known in late February following an Israeli army raid in the city of Nablus, during which 11 Palestinians were massacred. After Tulkarm's accession to the armed resistance and the completion of the formation of its cells, the resistance in the West Bank now has a shield and a sword, the newly formed group said in a statement last month. Since then, the Tulkarm Brigade has claimed responsibility for at least 3 shooting attacks targeting Avnei Hafetz, an illegal settlement located in southeast Tulkarm, and the Zimmer military gate which connects the area to Israel. We don't follow foreign agendas, and our decision is unanimous to fight against the occupiers with all the means at our disposal, and the path we've chosen is armed struggle, a source close to the Tulkarm Brigade told Al-Arabi Al-Jadid. In the face of this new threat, the PA has moved quickly to oppose the new resistance group, raiding the home of a suspected leader of the group and arresting 3 other suspects over the past week. We will not tolerate scenes of anarchy and lawlessness in Tulkarm, the PA official stressed. Anyone who breaks the law or threatens the residents and the Palestinian security forces will be arrested and punished. The PA has long maintained deep security ties with the Israeli army to suppress resistance in the West Bank. Their collaboration with the apartheid government has led to plummeting support by citizens across the occupied territories. PA forces have conducted raids in Tulkarm and 2 adjacent refugee camps over recent days, rounding up dozens of citizens who took to the streets supporting the Tulkarm Brigade. Instead of defending the people against the crimes of the Israeli army, our leaders in Ramallah are sending the Palestinian security forces to arrest the young men who want to defend us. We believe the Palestinian Authority reached secret understandings with Israel and the U.S. at the recent summit in Aqaba. There's a conspiracy against all the armed factions in the West Bank, and we shouldn't allow it to pass, Yusuf Ismail, a Fatah activist from Tulkarm, recently told reporters. So I'm going to open a channel here. And remember, your engagement through a like, a share, and or subscribe will propel us, accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.